By Ava McNaughton, goalie for the Wisconsin women's hockey team. Ava, thanks for your time and how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Thanks for your time. So tell me about, school just ended. Tell me about how, the end of school went, after finishing up, your hockey season, that ended in March. So just tell me about, ending school, and just some of the things you're going to be doing this summer.
Yeah, so after the national championship in March, I actually had the World Championships for Team USA shortly after, which was
Good.
pretty much almost all of April, so I missed a lot of school for that. But it was a super cool experience. It was in a smaller city outside of Prague in Czechia. So it was my first time there, and it was my first time on the senior national team. So it was a great opportunity to just be around such high level athletes and kind of see where I stack up against the best hockey players in the world.
Yeah.
And then I actually was able to I didn't start the game, but I came in halfway through the game, and so I played my first minutes for the national team, which was definitely kind of like a dream come true or a goal checked off the list. But yeah, so we ended up winning gold at that event, and then which was obviously incredible, super cool experience. And then came home and then had like 2 or 3 more weeks of school and finished that up, and then headed home for a little bit. And then there was a goaltending development camp in May that I attended, which is kind of college age and U18 girls and guys as well. So that was just a 4 day weekend camp. And then now I'm at home just kind of training, off-season training, not ton of skating, but just, getting in the gym and kind of starting the off-season off. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, as you mentioned, you were just playing at nationals, with the senior team. Your bio says, you've, represented the U.S. You played on the under 18 team. So just tell me, what's it like, getting to represent the U.S.? Obviously that's probably, pretty special for you. And then also you mentioned missing a lot of school. So how was that, missing a lot of school, balancing that, while also traveling, playing in Prague and, representing the U.S.?
Yeah, it's always such an honor to represent the United States. Not everyone gets to say that they're able to do that. So just every time you put on the jersey, it's something special. And no matter like what your role is on the team, I think that it's definitely something that I've always worked for as a kid and even now. So yeah, my first U18 event was in 2022 in Madison. So it was kind of a full circle. It was like my first time playing in LeBron, and then I ended up obviously going into Wisconsin the year after that. So that was my first kind of experience with USA hockey at the international level, and then it's kind of a break in time in between U18s and the national team. They did start to introduce like U23s. So that kind of is like college age. That's like the intermediate in between the U18 level and the national team level, but there's no like international world championships for that, like the World Juniors that the men have. But yeah, I mean, obviously it's always, you're excited to get the call that you're going to be going to, one of these world championship events. But at the same time, like you still are playing at your school and, you have your academic obligations too. And so, luckily, I am in a pretty difficult major. I'm majoring in biochemistry and global health, but
Good.
our professors were really, really accommodating and we're just kind of willing to do whatever was necessary to try and help me have success in the classroom from overseas, but then also, be in Prague and do all that. So it was definitely took a lot of time and a lot of time management and balance, but able to get it done. So yeah, it was a cool experience and glad that they were able to accommodate it.
That's great. So tell me about, some of the things, hockey wise you're going to be doing this summer, and then just tell me about some of the, non-hockey things, you're going to do this summer, tell me about some of the, hobbies you have outside of hockey.
Yeah, so this summer, almost our entire team goes to Madison, goes back to Madison in the summer to train.
Okay.
So it's like an 8 week summer session. So I'll be heading back there in 2 weeks or so. We lift and skate a couple times together throughout the week. But then I have this accelerated organic chemistry lab that I'm doing over the summer. just because it's like a lab that's typically offered during the fall and spring semesters, and it's two like 4 hour labs a week, and it's really hard to make that fit into both like my hockey schedule and then my other classes that I'm taking. So I'm gonna take that over the summer, which is like 10 or 11 days, I think. So I'm gonna try and knock that out while I'm in Madison, and then yeah, for all of July I'll be in Madison, and then National Festival for USA Hockey is in August. So kind of doing the training and everything to get ready for that, which is like the beginning of the um, Olympic year, like scheduling for training for the 2026 Olympics. So,
Yeah.
and then
Uh,
what was the second part of the question? I can't remember.
uh,
Oh, hobbies
just
outside of hockey.
yeah, just tell me about some of the non-hockey things you're planning to do if you have any time this summer.
Yeah, honestly, like I work a job. Work in like one of the genetics labs on campus, so I go in there and put in a good amount of time there, probably 20 hours a week or so. But other than that, like just kind of enjoying Madison as a city. It's really beautiful in the summer. There's, obviously the lakes are on both sides of the campus, and there's some cool hiking spots like, not too far away. But yeah, just kind of enjoying the time with teammates and getting to know the new freshmen, and just enjoying the time while we have it, because once school starts, it gets really busy and don't have as much time to kind of hang out and do, fun stuff with teammates. So
Yeah. So you're from Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh, which we'll talk about, but are you home in Pennsylvania right now? You mentioned you're
yeah.
going to be going back to, Wisconsin in a few weeks to train over the summer. So you do, yeah, just tell me about, so you mentioned you're home in Pennsylvania, so just tell me about, getting to be home and, what's that like? Because, you travel, you're at school in Wisconsin, you mentioned, you went to Prague for the, World Championship. So just what's it like right now, getting to be home for a couple weeks?
Yeah, it's great. It's definitely between the end of the school year and when we have to report back to campus for the summer, it's definitely like our longest consecutive break. So it's
Mhm.
definitely nice to be home and just spend time with my family and see old, like I'm training with my old strength coach that I used to work with in high school, and even previously to that. So just like kind of getting to catch up with old faces and then obviously spend time at home with my parents is really valuable. We also have a lake house just south of here in Deep Creek, Maryland. So we've been working on getting that house back into shape. It was being renovated for a while, so we have gone down there the past couple weekends and cleaned it out and put it back together. So excited to go back down there this weekend and go out on the lake on the boat. And yeah, I really enjoy wake surfing and
Mhm.
all kinds of water sports. So definitely looking forward to that. And then when I get back in August, we'll get to go out a couple times as well. So
Nice. So you mentioned you're a biochemistry major. That's definitely a very, intensive and difficult major. So how is it, balancing such a difficult major, and being one of the best, goalies in, the entire country? How is it balancing both of those things?
yeah, it's definitely it's a challenge, but I think the way Coach Johnson structures practice, he always wants it to be the the highlight of your day, like like you have like a hard class before practice, but then like you get to head to practice and it's like you're super excited to go to practice and almost have like a break from school. So it's definitely nice to have like an environment at the rink that kind of makes it kind of take your mind off of academics for a little bit, and then once you're done at the rink, you kind of have to turn back to the academics. But just like that balance between like being able to shut off the academics when you're at the rink, and then you know just like
Mhm.
I don't know. It's definitely not the easiest. I take normally 17 or so credits.
Okay.
So it's definitely a tight schedule, especially with the labs. Um, but I mean like when it comes down to it, like I you never know what pro hockey is going to look like for women, even with the PWHL now.
Yeah.
And I've always aspired to hopefully go to medical school, so it'll be interesting to see how the two fit together in the future. But I've always just wanted to, you know, learn as much as I could and put myself in a spot where I could either pursue hockey or pursue medical school or hopefully do both, which is what I'm hoping to do.
Yeah. So you just were talking about my next question, but my next question is talking about your future. You mentioned doing a little training for the Olympics that are going to be happening in 2026, this coming year in February. So do you have any goals? Hopefully, maybe try to play professional hockey in the PWHL, or maybe represent the U.S. in the Olympics, or are your goals more if that happens, that's great, but more shifting towards academics. Like hopefully getting into medical school and trying other avenues in life. What are your future plans? Or are you just right now just living in the moment, enjoying your time, at Wisconsin? Uh, what are your future
Yeah,
plans and goals?
I think I've always had a lot of different goals that kind of if one didn't work out, then I always had the other. But with the PWHL, it's definitely kind of changed the way I see my future, I guess. Obviously, you have a couple of players who are trying to pursue medical school as well as playing in the PWHL, like Claire Thompson, and I know Britta Curl, who was a teammate obviously or 2 years ago now, is also hoping to pursue medical school, and she's playing in the PWHL. So I think it'll be interesting to see how how they fit their two dreams together. But for right now, I think I'm definitely um, I obviously am working towards hopefully representing the United States at the 2026 Olympics, but if I'm still in a position where I'm playing well and obviously then probably playing in the PWHL, I'd like to represent the United States at the 2030 Olympics. So I think
Mhm.
it definitely is like I definitely have high hopes and high goals for both sides of my life, but um I think it'll kind of just come down to the timing of both of them to figure out how they fit together.
Mhm.
So yeah, almost yeah, maybe kind of living in the moment and just kind of letting it come to me is where I'm at right now. But I definitely like to try and plan the future, which is hard to do, obviously. So just kind of live in the moment and then hopefully everything will kind of fall into place.
Yeah. Well, good luck with your future, and we'll be rooting for whoever's representing the U.S. in the Olympics. I know USA and Canada always have a good rivalry at the Olympics, so it's always fun to watch. So you mentioned
Mhm.
training. You started in July. Your season schedule. It starts in September and it goes all the way. Hopefully if you make it all the way to the championship, through March. So that's long enough. But tell me about just the intensity it takes to be on the number one team in the nation. Wisconsin women's hockey. You mentioned that you start training all the way in July, and your season schedule doesn't even start till September. So just tell me about the training, and mostly it's almost like a 12 month thing, being on the number one team. Just tell me about the intensity it takes, just training and balancing academics, being on the number one team in the nation.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think last year was kind of eye-opening because it was my first year
Mhm.
being like the number one where I played almost all the games. And so it was definitely a little bit of a learning curve to try and figure out how to manage both like the physical load, but also the mental load. Just of like playing on the number one team with, those expectations, but then also kind of trying to earn my spot onto a couple of US teams throughout the year. And so, but then you're also obviously you're still trying to compete for your spot, at your school. So it definitely I would say it's more mentally demanding than people realize. I think it's obviously a lot of demand from the sport, and especially as a goalie, you have a lot of pressure on
Mhm.
you, and everyone can see when you make a mistake, and that might not be as evident for a player. So it's definitely kind of a unique situation where um, your physical game is obviously very important, but I think as you get older and progress through different levels of hockey, I think that it's been really important for me to learn how to manage the pressure and just, my mental state going into games and throughout the game. And then even like reflecting after the game, it's been really important for me to just kind of manage that. And then also like with being the number one team, you have a lot of eyes on you, and you can definitely have a lot of criticisms around social media and the internet in general. And I think just learning how to kind of shut that off and live in the moment, like with the 23 people around you. I think that
Mhm.
that's one thing that I really, really took away from this past season. Because there's always going to be plenty of people who aren't rooting for you, but I think it's more important to focus on the people who are. And um, yeah, that was one of my really big takeaways from that year. But as you move towards March, it's been a long season already, and then you kind of move into almost like more of like the where the USA events are normally in the spring and the summer. So it definitely does end up being kind of a whole year affair, but um, you kind of it's kind of different environments of playing hockey, and obviously it's the same sport and some familiar faces on both teams, but um, it's easy to kind of get caught up in it, but when you take a step back, like it's pretty cool to be able to play fully like all year round. It definitely is. It can take a toll on your body and your mind, but right now I'm kind of taking some time off the ice before we go back. So I'll have like a good 3 or 4 weeks off the ice, which will be valuable in the long term, but it's definitely hard in the moment to stay off the ice for this long. So
Yeah. So for you, tell me what it's like for you to be, a goalie. I played, goalie before, just, in soccer and like, up till like fourth grade. So, I have some goalie experience in my life, but not for, like 15 years. But anyway, for you, just tell me what it's like being a goalie, because, I have some experience just, playing, junior soccer and things like that. But, goalie, anywhere you make, you try to make, 20 to 40 saves a game, something roughly like that. And you try to not, let any goals, so with the goalie, you almost have to be nearly, almost, necessarily have to be perfect, but you try to be as, perfect as you can because, shots on goal, there's anywhere, like 20 to 40 a game, and you're trying not to let any goal or maybe just like one or two goals in a game. So it's very intensive, you have to be very sharp, not let any goals, and, there's a lot of times there's a lot of action, in the goal. So just tell me about, the intensity and what it takes to be a goalie. And then for you, just tell me what drew you to become a goalie, what you like about goalie. My favorite goalie growing up, was Henrik Lundqvist on the Rangers. Do you have any, goalies or any, NHL players that you looked up to, just as a junior, watching hockey?
yeah, I think as I was growing up, I think Carey Price was probably my like someone I looked up to. I just always thought that he was, pretty fundamentally sound and just like really relied on his skating and his positioning, but then he was also super athletic when he needed to be like in a desperation situation. So I'd say he was probably my, someone I tried to model my game after. But I don't really know why I ended up playing goalie. I started playing hockey, I was probably 5 or 6 years old. And it's the first couple of years, no one's really like the full-time goalie and you don't have any pads on. But I remember like when the pads started to get like, you know, moved around the team to so everyone could try goalie. I knew what like when it came around to my turn, I was just so excited for it. And then after my week of playing goalie, like I wanted someone to like, like not be able to go to the game so that I could be the goalie. And so I just as soon as like I had my first taste of it, it's what I wanted to do. And I really never played, like player in like a full ice team, like full year team. So I've really played goalie for almost as long as I can remember. But yeah, I'm not really sure why. I think, the gear was probably cool to me as a kid and, just something new. Um, but yeah, I think um, what were we talking about? The mental load? What were we talking about after that?
Just like the intensity it takes, because someone like
Oh
me,
yeah, yeah.
you try to, you don't necessarily have to be perfect, but you try to be, obviously if you get a shutout, which you've done on numerous occasions, especially this past season, that's always great. But anywhere you have, like 20 to 40 shots, just roughly guessing, a game, and you're trying not to let too many goals in, at most, like one or two or three a game. So just the intensity it takes to be a goalie, the physical load it takes, and just the near almost perfection you have to be, being a goalie, not trying to let, too many goals. Obviously if that happens in your team, you know, doesn't really have as good of a chance to win.
Yeah, I think that kind of comes back to what I talked about a couple questions ago where it was like it can definitely be the pressure can definitely get to you, especially on a team where you are like we are such an offensively powerhouse team. Um and everyone kind of expects us to, blow teams out of the water. And sometimes I think that, people can start to expect that we get shutouts against teams that might not be as talented as our team was this past year. But I think that that's kind of where it starts to snowball is like kind of you said, like people do try to be perfect in this position. And I think when you take a step back and kind of take a human approach, you realize that it's nearly impossible to be perfect, especially over a whole season's worth of games. And I think that a lot of goalies definitely try and chase perfection, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like it definitely drives me to be better, and just kind of like compete against myself almost. But there definitely is a point where trying to chase perfection can have like a negative impact on your game where, you're worried so much about letting a goal in that you're really not playing to your full potential because you're worried about failing instead of, worrying about, like the positive things in your game and like relying on your strengths. And when you start to dwell on those negative things, or you try and overanalyze the goals that went in the previous game, it's a slippery slope. So I think it definitely is valuable to look at your mistakes and figure out how you can grow, but it's not something that you need to dwell on for very long because the next game is either the next day or a week away. So it's a quick turnaround. And yeah, chasing perfection is definitely a slippery slope, and I think everyone's probably um, guilty of doing it. But I think that's something that I really grew in this past year is kind of realizing that I'm not going to be perfect every game, and that's okay because even the best goalies in the world get scored on, and sometimes you have to tip your hat to the player, and sometimes maybe you could have done something better, but at the end of the day you kind of have to move forward and try and stop the next one. So
Yeah. So one more question about this. Let's just take a scenario. Let's just say, for a game, 4-2, your team wins. Are you someone who, let's say the game also, let's say you had, let's say you had 30 saves in that game. So it's a 4-2 game. You had 30 saves. Are you someone who, you dwell on the negatives, you dwell on, oh, I let those two goals up, or you more just looking on the successes, like I had 30, saves in that game and our team won, 4-2, what type of, attitude would you take to that game? Would you more, reflect on the two goals that you let up, or would you more, reflect on the 30 saves that you had and, the team victory?
yeah, I think it's kind of a two-sided problem. I think that um, like initially, like right after the buzzer goes off and we won, I think definitely like, kind of ride the high of winning the game for sure. Um, and 30 saves is a lot, especially our team is also very defensively sound. So I probably only had 30 shots in, probably less than 10 games.
Okay.
So it also depends on, like what kind of situations were you facing because, like sometimes we'll play, a lower ranked team, but I'll end up with, a breakaway and a couple 2-on-1s and a bunch of power play or penalty kills against. And so it really depends on the game, but I think like right after the game you kind of just ride the high of winning the game, and then after you get back to the hotel or back to my apartment, then you kind of start to reflect on like what I could have done better and whatnot. And normally our video from the game comes out pretty quickly, so I think I try and wait to analyze how I played until I can actually see it again, because sometimes in your head it looks so different than what actually happened. So I think that when that video comes out, it kind of is like closure as to like, oh, like I should have done this, or like this is where I made a mistake. Um but then after that, like then you kind of have to, like I said, just move forward and look towards the next one. But yeah, kind of a double-edged sword. But yeah, I think 30 saves in almost any game is probably I'd be happy with that. And especially like if a team's getting 30 shots against us, they're probably pretty good
Okay.
opponents. So that's one of those things where it's easier to be happy about a win when it's a higher ranked team, but sometimes when we play lower ranked teams, it's you start to feel
Okay.
the pressure to get a shutout because people think that there's such a disparity. But sometimes, given the nature of the game, lower ranked teams will still get good opportunities against us, and sometimes they capitalize. And at the end of the day, they're still D1 hockey players, even though they play on a lower ranked team. And I think that you have to respect everyone you play. And so yeah, you take the high on the win for sure.
Yeah. That's great. So let's talk about this past, season. Your team went 38-1 and had two ties. So just tell me about, how exciting, obviously we'll talk about the national championship, that victory in my next question, but just overall, how exciting was this, past season? Obviously only one regulation loss. That was to Ohio State back in November. Just, how exciting was this past season, your team, playing so well, and what's it like, the atmosphere you have at your games? I see a lot of your home games are, sold out, and so I'm sure you have a lot of fans there and good atmosphere. So just how much fun is it for you, getting to represent Wisconsin and, being the starting goalie this season?
Yeah, it was definitely, kind of an unprecedented season where we, won the regular season and then the playoff, like the WCHA playoff and then the national championship. So, you couldn't ask for much more than that. Obviously, maybe you want that one regulation loss back, but I think it was good for our team to kind of experience loss. It was like, you're always going to have a target on your back as the number one team, but I think being undefeated is that much harder. And so obviously, like, would have loved to have won that game, but I think, there is the pressure does get taken off a little bit when you're not undefeated anymore. And I think, our season could have looked a little bit different had we been playing with the undefeated title on our back too. Because there's already a lot of expectations on our program just because of how well we've been historically, or how well we've played historically. Um, but yeah, I think that was one added layer of pressure that could have been on us that might have changed the trajectory of our season. But you can't. It's the same thing. You can't dwell on that one loss. We still had 38 wins, and then two shootout overtime, two shootouts or whatever. So yeah, definitely a super exciting season to be a part of, and honestly, still kind of surreal with the whole timeline of what happened, especially towards the second half of the season. Um, so yeah, it was just a privilege to be a part of such a great group, and
Mhm.
just really fun memories to look back on for sure.
Yeah. So your team won the national championship this past year. You won 4-3 in overtime over Ohio State. Your teammate Kristen Sims, got a goal, late in the third, I believe, under a minute left. It was a penalty, and then she got the winner in overtime. So just overall, how special and how cool was this, to be able to win the national championship, and celebrate, this championship with your teammates. And then also for you, being a goalie, your team was down in the second period, 3-1. Obviously you as a goalie, you're trying to do your job, not let any other goals, not let Ohio State, get that fourth goal. But you can't necessarily, change the fact that, your team only has one goal because you're, the goalie, you're not the one scoring. The goal is the best you can do is just do your job, not try to let Ohio State get another goal and, you know, maybe, pump up your team like in, on the bench and in the locker room. But other than that, you can't necessarily, be the one scoring the goal. So how was that for you, when your team was down 3-1 and then, just, seeing your team come back and then get the win in overtime. Just tell me about that.
Yeah, I think when we went down early in the second, 3-1, it was definitely a little bit of a shot in the heart, but at the same time, like it was literally, I think, in the first, less than a minute of the second period. So at that point, we still basically had two full periods to play, and we've scored two goals, you know, so quickly before, and I think that to me, I had the confidence that our team had the offensive power to be able to pop a couple in there, especially with how much time we had left. Had it been 3-1 with, a lot less time left, I think it would have been a little more nerve-wracking. But with all the time we had left, I knew that, we had so many strong um, threats between, our offense, but then also even our defense. So just, having that trust in them that they'd be able to power through and get a couple in. But um, I think also like for me, I couldn't focus on like trying to let in, less than, I couldn't focus on letting in less goals at that point because they were already in the net. So I think to me, I was just focused on making every save I could because at that point you never know what save could be the game-winning save. Um, and I think about there was a play in the second period where they ended up with almost like a partial breakaway, and it it glanced off my blocker and off the top of my stick. Like that was probably like had that gone in, then it would have been 4-1. So like you kind of have to like think about that, like you're making a difference in the game for the future. You know what I mean? Or even like, it's such a momentum shift if you're down by three instead of two. Like it's just then it's kind of demoralizing. So I think that at that point you just kind of have to try and keep your keep your team in the game and, make all the big saves that you can and then, claw our way back. And then obviously we scored one there and KK scored in the second period. And then, I thought, in the intermission, the second intermission, I thought like, we were going to come out just guns a-blazing and just pop one in right in the beginning. But credit to Ohio State, like they played a really lockdown defensive third period for, 19 minutes. And, um, they shut us down for almost the whole period. And then they ended up with kind of a fluky penalty. They ended up with a too many men, which doesn't happen too often, I feel like, especially in big games. But we caught a break there and then Layla saw the illegal hand on the puck in the crease, with I don't know how many seconds left. And came back to the bench and was like, you have to challenge that, you have to challenge that. And so we did because obviously our season was on the line. And so we challenged it and it came back as a good challenge. So we ended up with a penalty shot because the player used her hand in the crease. Um, and then Kirsten is such a breakaway like specialist. She just has such good hands and has so many different moves that are so just so effective. And so props to her for, handling the pressure like that and being able to come up with a great move that she executed perfectly. And so it takes a lot of poise to be able to do that. So it was definitely really cool to see all of her hard work and she works really hard on all types of things, but her hands have always been kind of what's stuck out for her. And it shined in that moment, and then obviously she was able to be the hero and pop in the overtime winner as well. So it was just really cool to be able to experience the other side of the national championship because in 2024 we lost to Ohio 1-0, so it's kind of the tables turned, and then obviously you kind of get a taste of both sides. And it's definitely valuable to feel both, but obviously a lot more fun to come out on top.
Yeah. Well, that was a very exciting game, but I'm sure very nerve-wracking, in the moment. So congrats on that victory. Uh,
Thank you.
so something else, cool your team got to do this past season was your team played a game against Ohio State, at Wrigley Field. So just how was that, for you getting to play at, one of the, iconic sports venues, Wrigley Field in the U.S. And, was there anything different, getting used to the ice or anything with the conditions that you had to get used to, playing an outdoor game? Because, a few years ago I attended, Rangers and Islanders at MetLife, outside, and they had a delay, due to the sun and the ice. So, was there anything you and your team had to get used to, playing an outdoor, game? Given that, hockey, you play indoors and don't have to deal with the outdoor, elements.
Yeah, I think it was definitely a little bit of a learning curve.
Mhm.
Obviously, I don't really skate around the whole ice, so it's a little different for me. But I thought the ice was good.
Okay.
It was kind of a later game, and it was like maybe 30-ish degrees, and it was good. It wasn't too sunny. The player said that the ice was bad, which I can't really attest to because I don't really like stick handle or I don't really skate around the whole ice like they do, but
Okay.
I honestly didn't have too much of a problem adjusting. I'm relatively like hot on the ice, like I'm normally like sweating a lot. So it kind of just like negated the sweating and I was just like warm instead of like sweating. So it was just like, it was obviously different. But I think like when the game actually is going on, you kind of zone out of like where you are. But then like during the intermissions or like when we were walking out or the national anthem, I think it was surreal as well. Just like I kind of just felt like a little kid like on the pond, like as like just growing up, like you kind of always like just grow up thinking of those moments, and it was really cool, and I've never really experienced something like that. It was my first time playing a competitive game outdoors, and um, yeah, it's definitely probably one of my favorite memories from this year, and it's just such a unique opportunity that not a lot of people would be able to say that they've done, and yeah, I look back fondly on that. It was just surreal, and I just like I almost like didn't even feel like real, like I don't know, it just almost felt like a movie, I guess, but. Yeah, if we could play a game like that every year, I would love to, but it's definitely hard to make that happen. So
Yeah.
yeah, just really appreciative that we were able to do that.
Yeah, definitely very cool. So, We'll talk about where you grew up. You grew up in Sevinsfield, Pennsylvania. If you look it up, it says it's a beautiful place. It's a small hometown atmosphere and has a strong sense of community. It's, outside a big, town, of, Pittsburgh. But you live in a small, it's not even a town. I guess it's a borough. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's just what it says online.
Mhm.
Uh, Population is under 3,000, so very small. But then you can just go to Pittsburgh and, then you get that big city feel. But just tell me about Sevinsfield, Pennsylvania, where you grew up, and just tell me how you got started playing hockey.
Yeah, so the reason why it's called Seven Fields is because it's basically like 1 mile by 7 miles long, so it's a pretty small area.
Okay.
So I mean, like we definitely live like around other little towns that are bigger than ours for sure. You don't have to drive far to end up in like, a little shopping center, and then obviously you just hop on the highway and you end up down in Pittsburgh. But if you go the other way, then you kind of end up in the countryside where there's a lot of farms and cows and that kind of thing, just a lot of rolling hills. So it's definitely, you kind of have the best of both worlds where you can have the busier urban type of lifestyle, or you can kind of head out towards the rural parts of the area, and it's a little bit of slower living out there. So kind of in the middle, which I really enjoy. But I come from a family, my parents, my dad didn't really play any sports, but he was on the rifle team. His mom wouldn't let him play like contact sports because he's relatively short. He's like, he's probably like 5'10" or so, 5'9", somewhere in there. But then my mom played soccer. So yeah, I don't really come from a hockey family, which, isn't really uncommon in Pittsburgh. Obviously we have the Penguins, but when I was growing up, hockey wasn't like a huge thing here. Obviously as I've grown, it's been cool to see the sport grow in general, but also see all the opportunities that girls have now in Pittsburgh. It might have my journey might have looked a lot different had there been more, girls hockey presence here in Pittsburgh, but I still am so grateful for, all the opportunities that I had growing up and being able to go to Bishop Kearney in Rochester. I think that that was really, really beneficial for my development. But my interest in hockey came from the 2010 Olympics. My family loves watching the Olympics in general, but we were flipping through all the sports, and the hockey game came up, and it was actually the U.S. versus Canada game, and I think that just seeing that, like, just the speed and like them all like playing together, and the Olympics in general, I think just kind of bring out a sense of patriotism in me, and I think that that happens for a lot of people. And it was just kind of sparked something early, and then I remember in like elementary school. Um, we were in the cafeteria, and they put on like the gold medal game on the little TVs in the corners, and I think that I just thought it was just such a cool sport, and begged my parents to put me in, like, learn to play, and then just kind of ran with it.
Yes. Yes, you mentioned you're from the Pittsburgh area. The Penguins are there. Are you a Penguins fan? Do you have any favorite NHL team, or do you just have any memories, watching any, NHL or hockey, on TV or in person?
Yeah, I would say I'm definitely a Penguins fan just kind of by default.
Mhm.
I don't watch a ton of NHL hockey during the year just because we're pretty busy, but
Okay.
definitely always kind of rooting for them in the back of my head.
Yeah.
But I remember like when they were on their little cup run in like 2017, 2018, I think. Um, we went over to like my family friend's backyard, and kind of like we just had like a little party and like watched the games, in their backyard, and
Mhm.
I remember that pretty vividly. And then also when I was playing for like the youth team, Penn's Elite, we won the youth national championship in 2019, and they actually invited us out to like have seats in a box and watch I think it was the first round at that point. So yeah, definitely some cool memories, kind of intertwined in there for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm a Rangers fan, so I like, going to their games and watching them. Um,
Hmm.
so this week, it's going to be the Stanley Cup Finals. It's Florida and Edmonton. I believe that was what it was last year. I believe Florida won. Correct me if I'm wrong, but do you think you'll watch any of the Stanley Cup Finals, or do you have any rooting interest? I think I'll probably root for the Oilers just because Connor McDavid. I think he's pretty good, one of the better hockey players.
Yeah, especially since I've been home, my dad and I watch like almost every single hockey game that's been on since the first round. So it's
Yeah,
definitely been a little bit of a commitment in the beginning for sure when it was like two games a night.
yeah,
But obviously now it's kind of thinning out, and then I think it starts on Wednesday, so I'm sure we'll watch it. I don't really know who we're rooting for. I think, well, my dad and I wanted Dallas to win, but obviously that's not it anymore. So,
yeah,
um, honestly, I think I might be rooting for Florida just because it's like USA versus Canada. So I vote, or I would root for the Panthers, but I don't really have any strong ties to either one.
yeah. I lost interest last year after the Rangers lost in the Eastern Conference Finals to Florida, and so
Mhm.
I'll probably just be
Yeah.
rooting for Oilers. But I don't know, I've been watching a
Yeah.
lot of the NBA because the New York Knicks were in it, but then they lost this past weekend. So you mentioned my next to last question that I want to ask you. You went to high school in Rochester. So tell me a little bit about because you grew up near Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. Tell me a little bit about how you ended up going to high school in Rochester. What it was like for you going all the way from growing up in Pennsylvania to then going to high school in Rochester and just what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, so I finished eighth grade here at like the local public school. And then, it was a decision that we didn't take lightly, but we ended up deciding to, commit to going to Bishop Kearney. Now it's BK Selects, but it was Selects Academy at Bishop Kearney when I went. And yeah, it was when I went, it was 40 girls who lived in the dormitory, just above the Catholic school there. It used to be like where the brothers lived a long time ago, and they renovated the dorms on the third floor, and it's just the 40 of us. And then as I was there, they added four boys teams and renovated the other side of the third floor. So they've definitely created a hockey powerhouse there. So there's now like 120 hockey players who go there, and the boys side produces a lot of really really good talent. They've had a bunch of people go through like NTDP and then play high level juniors, all sorts of places. But then obviously the girls program has been around for a while. I think they're probably coming up on the 10th year or so. Um, and a lot of big names have went through there who are playing high level D1 and also have a lot of national team players, including myself, and then names like Layla Edwards and KK Harvey. So just a lot of great talent has went through there, and they really, it was definitely hard leaving home. Had just turned 14, I think, or maybe I was 13 even, I'm not sure. But yeah, I was just, a little young freshman going in, living away from home for the first time. And it's definitely an adjustment, but I was always kind of an independent kid. And I learned how to, live on my own and, do all those kind of things and be independent and learn how to manage my own time. Obviously they facilitated that for us because there was girls who were, like 13 years old through 19. So you have a wide range where you're learning a lot in those ages, and they did a really great job with everything when it came to off ice, on ice, academics, and then also just like just being a good person and learning those values. I think being there was really transformative for me in a lot of different ways, and it was a hard decision in the moment, but I wouldn't have changed it
Yeah.
and done any other thing now. So yeah, I look back fondly on those 4 years. It was really fun and met a lot of great people, and we didn't end up winning the national championship there, but it was still just such a cool experience and still friends with a lot of those players today. And so yeah, it was a really good experience for me.
Yeah. For my next to last question, two things that I noticed about, your fellow goalies on, this past team. Chloe is from California, so she was the only one, on your last team that's from a warm weather state. All your other teammates are from, some sort of, whether it be, Canada or some, form of, cold weather state, but she is the only one, California from a warm weather state. And then your other goalie, Quinn, she actually transferred from your your rival Ohio State. So do you ever, poke fun at, Chloe or Quinn, that, they're from, California and, she transferred from Ohio State and, outside of this fun question, just tell me about, how much you like being on your team, how much, you get along with your teammates.
Yeah, I think it's definitely Chloe and I have actually known each other for a really long time. We played in a couple of like spring tournaments together as kids. We were probably 12 or 13 maybe. So I've known her for a really long time, and she actually, um, she lives in Wisconsin as well, so she kind of lives, two
Okay.
different places. But it definitely was really cool for her to kind of, the hockey is sparse in California, so having her, kind of make it out of California and make a name for herself and be at, the best school in the country. Definitely props to her. Obviously, I'd forget that she's from California even.
Okay.
Um, but sometimes then like during the breaks it's funny because we'll be like in snow and she'll be like, in her swimsuit like at the beach. So sometimes obviously it's evident, but no, honestly, don't really pay attention to it. And at the beginning, I think that it's definitely hard. We had just lost to Ohio, and then Quinn was
Mhm.
coming in that June, and so it's definitely a quick turnaround. And I think at the beginning, some people were a little cautious and were a little apprehensive, but throughout the summer and then into the season, you know, you she's part of our team, and you accept her as a Badger, and you know doesn't really matter where people came from. We have people transfer in and out all the time, and we're just happy to have the group we have, and the camaraderie that we have is it's what happens when you play such a long season with the same group of girls. You learn a lot about each other, and obviously sometimes you're closer with certain teammates than others, but I know that I could go up to anyone in the room and have a joke, and but they'd also have my back at the same time if I needed them or whatever. So yeah, it's so fun playing at Wisconsin. Between the academics is so rigorous there, and then obviously we play for such a historically good team who's built a legacy of excellence, and we hope to continue that and continue to hopefully rack up the trophies and whatever. But beyond that, it's a school that you have a lot of fun at, but you also work really hard at, and the surrounding community comes out to support us, which you don't see that at a lot of places for women's hockey, and so it's definitely a super special and unique place that um, I'm really happy to be a part of and to wear the W. But
Yeah.
um, there's so many people I could thank for getting there, but I'm just so appreciative to, the people who kind of started it all for me and supported my goals from the beginning and allowed me to
Mhm.
get there, and my parents supported me through it all. So yeah, just kind of a full circle moment because I committed there so young, and then now actually playing there and then winning the Natty was kind of the cherry on top.
Yeah. Finally, you're just talking about this, but I'll end on this question. Just how much fun is college hockey, and how much do you enjoy getting to represent Wisconsin?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I don't take for granted. It's so fun to play in Wisconsin every single weekend that we get to. I mean, it's not that many when you look at it in the grand scheme of it. So I definitely try and enjoy it. But hearing all the people cheering for us and all the red and white in the stands, and then even when we go on the road or like when we played in the national championship in Minneapolis, like the whole arena was pretty much cheering for us. And so it's a testament to, the city of Madison and the university as a whole. I think that they've supported women's hockey for a really long time and it's paying off. And I think that you know, it's fun to play for a school that like supports women's sports, but especially our team. And um it's cool to see what we can do and have all the people supporting us. So it's definitely one of a kind, and I wouldn't change it for anything.